guys and gals, to the garage. Today we'll be talking about my 1991 Chevy Camaro. Yes, it does look like every single other third gen that's clapped out and rusty and mismatched body panels. But it is a little different than your run-of-the-mill 305 small block Chevy with a cast iron 4-barrel intake and some cool camel hump heads on it. This has a turbo 3400 V6 that I built myself. I've received several messages asking about the build specs and what I put into it because there's hardly any of them out there, and I'd rather just make a video about it than try to write all this out, type all this out many times over. That way you guys can refer to it. If you have any questions, please comment, message me, whatever. This video is not for views, it's just so I can help somebody out. I'd like to see more of these builds out there. I can tell you parts are kind of hard to come by and everything's a one-off, so if there was a little more popularity, maybe we could see a little more out there. I think they're worth it. It does entail a lot of work. In fact, I'll tell you right now. You might want to stop the video and find something about an LS if you're just wanting simplicity and cheap. Relatively cheap this build was, but the simplicity, no. You can buy so much off the shelf parts for LS that I hate to say it, that's probably the way to go. But if you're interested in proving a point, which is exactly what I wanted to prove, I wanted to see what a V6 could do. Everyone's always, oh, LS swap it, or small block Chevy with some nitrous on it. If you're wanting pure speed, go ahead and just do that. You're probably going to be better off in the end. However, I was trying to prove a point. This build all started several years back, probably 8 or 9 years back. One of my dad's friends has a Cyclone pickup and went for a ride in it, and I just could not believe that that was a V6. Talk about an animal. And that all-wheel drive just makes them a monster. It was so fast, I was impressed. And yes, I know really they're, in the grand scheme of things, there's much faster out there, but just on the street, it'd be really hard to compete with that. And there's proof that you could make some good power out of a V6. Granted, that's a 4.3. So after that, kind of set my mind. This originally was a 3.1 junk engine, but made no horsepower, not a lot of aftermarket support for it. But why not? I was like, oh, cool. Just slap a turbo on there and make it fast. No, that didn't work at all, actually. I made up some terrible exhaust system, and I mean terrible, because this was just to kind of see how it would do if it blow up. I was already convinced that something else was going in there. This wasn't going to be my permanent engine. So I was like, well, let's just give it a shot. Made some really... At first it started with one log to a turbo and the other log just straight out. Did not build an ounce of boost. It did not work. I can tell you that theory definitely is tested. Make sure you have both your manifolds going to the turbo. Will not do anything. You're wasting your time. Again, this was all for fun. Yes, I could have just swapped in a smaller Chevy and been done with it, but just to learn, see what boost is about. It is addicting, I will tell you that. Once you start, you'll never stop. My next attempt, I actually got smarter and kind of built another crappy header system. I wouldn't call it a header system. That'd be an insult to headers. Built another exhaust system for it, and this was just running at that time it was a T3, T4 turbo that I got on Facebook Marketplace for pennies on the dollar. It was a whole kit with the intercooler and piping, everything. Someone had tried to turbo their Camaro V8 and it blew up, and that was the end for them. I think I picked it up for $200 with turbos, piping, boost, wastegate, blow-off valve, you name it, it was in there. It was a good deal. So picked it up. The T3, T4, I didn't do any tuning. I did put a manual fuel pressure regulator on it, a cheap one. I will warn you to stay away from those cheap ones. They're not very good. It's not worth the effort. In fact, this one actually runs a mid-grade kind of level regulator. I do like that one, worth the money. It was like a, I don't know, $80 to $100 regulator. Not as expensive as the really fancy ones, but way better than the cheap $30 ones from eBay. I had that on it. At first, that was about the only upgrade. I didn't even do injectors because I was too dumb to know any better. Went and tried to test it. It built boost, but it was at the time detonating so bad that I didn't even know that was detonation. But you couldn't kill this motor. It just was impossible. Like, they just didn't make enough power, and it wasn't making any more power. In fact, it was running so lean that it was just basically dying. So I went to a junkyard, put in some fuel injectors out of a SSEI Bonneville. Tried to buy that Tuner Cats OBD1 software. Messed around with it, messed around with it, messed around with it, messed around with it. Just couldn't get it to work. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who do a way better job at that than I do. It was very complicated. Chip burning was no fun at all. You had to take the chip out, burn it, put it back in, go test, do the same thing over, and just wasn't right. None of it was. The motor wasn't built for it. So at that point, I'm like, forget this. Cranked the boost up to like, I don't know, 20 pounds or 25 pounds. Went down and just blew it up exactly the way I wanted to. Popped the head gasket, bent some rods, broke some pistons. Perfect. Loved it. So what now? At that point, I'm like, well, it's officially gone, which was the goal because it was so weak that I couldn't stand to have it in there. And it needed something better. So I'm like, well, you could go LS, but I didn't know enough about them at that time, which was now, 8-9 years ago. It was still very expensive to do LS swaps. Yeah, they were still reasonable, but yeah. And then you could also go small block Chevy, which I could have done all day long. And this was the determining factor for me. It was so cheap. I was just out of college, no money. This is my very first project car I bought in college. I've had this thing now for almost 12 years actually. So it didn't have any money. This was the cheapest. In fact, up to this point, I think there could have been max of like $400 or $500 with the Tuner Cat software and the box full of turbos. Nothing was put into it, and the car even itself, as you can tell, didn't have any extra put in. So I'm like, well, I don't have money for a transmission, and I will tell you right now for a fact, if you want to do this build, you will need a 60-degree V6 transmission, automatic or manual if you want. The V8 bell housing for small block Chevy, which would fit an LS or even a 4.3 V6, are different. They're quite a bit bigger than the actual V6 60-degree, like your 2.8, 3.1, 3.4. That would be all in our configuration. Front wheel drive, there's a couple more. But you need one of those, and that's what I had in here. It worked fine. I'm like, well, I don't have money for a transmission. It's tough to find them. Marketplace wasn't around at that time. It was Craigslist, and it was not nearly as good as Marketplace is. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just try to build this V6 to prove a point, because everyone told me, you're wasting your time, buy a V8, toss it in there. Yeah, it makes sense. By the time you buy a transmission, an LS or a small block Chevy, and build them, that was adding up, in my opinion, to, I don't know, probably $3,000-$4,000. I didn't have that at all, not even close. I figured I could go pick up a V6 pretty cheap, try to do a turbo kit on it for, $1,500. Wrong, but we'll get to that later. So I did a bunch of research. There's a lot of good information out there. I'm sure most of the people on the V60 degree page have really good information. But found that the 3.4 out of a, let's see, I got my notes here, 1993 to 1995 Camaro or Firebird is the biggest displacement V6 that'll fit onto the 60-degree transmission, because other than that, all you had was the 2.8 and the 3.1, and then you get into the front wheel drive ones, which apparently, I don't know much about that. I'm sure some other people can chime in, but for a rear wheel drive configuration, the starter's on the wrong side, and there's some other modification. Engine mounts aren't quite right. The 3.4 bolted right into this Camaro. No modification, which is another reason I was happy for that. I didn't have any of the cross members for the LS or the small block Chevy. The engine mounts were all V6, so I went to the local U-Pull-It, found a 3.4. The good news is they're not a very desirable engine, so picked it up dirt cheap. I think it was like $500 with all the wire and harness accessories, full engine, intake, you name it, manifolds. But picked one up. Luckily, I had done a bunch of research, test fit a bunch of times, fit right in there, no problem. I did go ahead and have it built because I will tell you right now, if you're thinking of this build, I did a 3400 intake. In fact, actually, let's just go ahead and show you. There it is. It's definitely not your run-of-the-mill LS or small block Chevy. And I tell you, another reason I was glad I actually built this, the attention. Like, especially once it starts running pretty quick. This one on its last pass out, and it is continually getting better, thank goodness, ran a 12.3 in the quarter mile. To a, turbo LS, that's a joke, of course, or any other nitrous small block Chevy, that's probably right around there. But for a V6, that's pretty impressive, and I could tell you everyone knew it. Like, you pull up there, this thing doesn't sound like a V8, and it's got a side dump exhaust right behind the passenger, just a single, of course, 4-inch pipe. So it's loud, but it's not V8 loud. So everyone had to come ask me, what is that? Like, it just doesn't sound right. And it was running fast enough that it was impressive. Like, it was beating LSs all day long, as long as they weren't souped up. Yeah, don't want anyone to get offended, because LS is a great engine. I'm building a 1982 Camaro with a turbo LS as just a fun drag car. Because, yes, if you want to go really fast, that's what you need. But this is not a going fast car. This is my street cruiser, 26 miles to the gallon, fairly reliable once I get the computer figured out. Love driving it. Drives down the road with the 700R4 in it and 373 rear end gears, just putts. 26 miles a gallon, 28 maybe. Like, great gas mileage. Everything works in here. I hooked up all of the gauges. I made a note, I hate swaps that look like swaps. I wanted this to look like how Camaro should have came out. In fact, I would have killed if they had a turbo Camaro back in the day. It should have been exactly like this. So everything's incorporated. All my gauges worked. I have everything I can read. I have the main computer still inside, but does basically nothing minus run the accessories and cruise control. The 3400 computer is actually sitting in the heater box, and that'll get changed again. I'll get to that later. Way too much to talk about. But anyways, so this is my cruiser. This is not a drag car, full interior. It's not lightened in any way other than a fiberglass hood, which did help out severely actually for times. It is still everything. It even has your heavy front bumper support and rear bumper support. So it's just a street cruiser. Drag radial tires, nothing super fancy. I got subwoofer and amp and stuff, so it's not like it's a lightweight build. That being said, this car, when I weighed it, was exactly 3,500, or no, 3,000 pounds even. So with the V6 and the aluminum heads, these things weigh nothing. So that is where it really shines. Being that it's so lightweight, it isn't necessarily makes a ton of horsepower, but with how light it is and decent horsepower, gets down the track pretty decent. So that's, again, kind of a benefit of these. Like even your 4.3 V6, those are pretty heavy. I mean, they're just a small block Chevy with 2 cylinders cut off. These are way smaller, and then you put the aluminum heads, aluminum intake on them. The turbo kit, of course, adds weight, but not a lot. So it's super, super lightweight. That's without me in it. I think it was, I can't even remember, probably 3,200, getting a little fat. But, so it's pretty lightweight combination. But this is just my cruiser. The goal was never to make this a drag car. The goal, however, is to upset V8s. And I won't say it always does that. That's not the point. It's just a V6, 3.4 liter, teeny little engine. In fact, if they win, they're still embarrassed. They lose, they're upset, because that is the most embarrassing thing you can lose to a clapped out third gen with a V6. Why I leave it this way is exactly that reason. I do want to paint it eventually, but it just doesn't bother me. Everyone judges it super hard. They look at it and say it's a pile of garbage, and that's, as a result, it takes a lot of people by surprise, and I enjoy that. It's all part of the sleeper vibes, because no. So back to the engine build. So got off on a tangent. I apologize. So we talked about it. The 3400 or 3.4 liter block is the one that's in there. Another reason to go with that block. The 3.1 does not have cam sensor spots, crank sensor spots, 2 crank sensor spots, and 1 cam sensor spot. So you cannot do what I already set this up in my mind. That OBD1 was going in the trash. I mean, it's still in there, but it does not tell anything to this car. It doesn't even tell the tranny when to lock up the converter anymore. I hated that. It was terrible. Again, I'm sure there's some people out there, but it's untunable. Nobody wants to touch them. And unless you're a side tie where they already have some support, nobody wants to do anything. So I wanted OBD2. Again, super, super cheap. I was trying to go on a budget, so I wanted to be as cheap as possible. So I'm like, OBD2, factory, 3400 harness. I could have got the one out of the 93, 95. I believe, and again, somebody probably could chime in, it's I don't think it's a chip, but it's just right after that. It's like OBD 1.5, and I just didn't want to deal with that, I guess. So OBD 2, which meant going to like a 3400 wiring harness. So topped it off, went out to my local U-Pull-It, and I can tell you there are, at least at mine, 1,000,000 3400 engines out there. It's so easy to get parts. In fact, if one of those breaks, something cracks, you can go back out and get one for pennies on the dollar. I got the complete top end assembly off of 3400. 2001 Monte Carlo is what it came out of. Or, yeah, 2001. Doesn't really matter, honestly. Just any 3400. I think the later the better. They might have made a smidgen more horsepower. Again, I'm not sure, but so aluminum heads off the 3400, lower intake. That's actually a 3500 upper intake. They say you're not supposed to combine them, but they bolt up just fine. I had a 3400 on there, upper intake, Looked super badass. I had it all orange accented. It was beautiful. I love the thing. It kept cracking on the back bolt way at the back. It cracked, TIG welded it, cracked again, and I just was done with it. So I swapped to the 3500 for multiple reasons, intake for multiple reasons. One, the way they bolt down is so thick, it's physically impossible for them to crack. Thank goodness. I was tired of dealing with it. Created major vacuum leaks, or boost leaks even, technically. It's just a pain in the butt. Looks so cool, though. I do prefer the 3400 look. Another thing is the throat on the 3500 is so much bigger to accept the bigger throttle body that I got off of, let's see, LX5, 65 millimeter throttle body from a 3.5 liter Oldsmobile Aurora or Integra, 1999 to 2002. Went out to my local U-Pull-It. They're a little rarer. I lucked out and there was only one in the junkyard, but grabbed the throttle body. I think it was like 10, 15 bucks. They hardly charge you because they don't know what's good and what's not. Cleaned it up. I got the kit to adapt that throttle body because that is a manual throttle body, whereas the 3500 comes with an electric throttle body or drive-by wire, as you call it. And I didn't want to deal with all that. So the kit comes from Wide Open Throttle Technologies. A lot of the actually any of the V65 stuff I'll reference comes from Open Throttle Technologies. I think Ben Phillips is his name. Really good guy. Called him many times. Super nice. That is the only place you can really get parts for these engines, like aftermarket parts, and it's not a lot. I mean, he does great. It has a lot of stuff, but like, you still got to build a lot of stuff yourself. But he had a kit with the adapter plate, throttle cable bracket, bolts, everything perfect. Very reasonable. I can't remember the price on it, but very reasonable. Bolted right on. I will tell you, I could not get it to seal on the back. The plate between the intake, it didn't come with a gasket. It just said silicone. And I siliconed it and it leaked. And I siliconed it and leaked. I had to do a smoke test to finally figure it out because it was running like garbage. Would not idle. It was all over the place. And come to find out, it just couldn't get it to seal no matter what I did. So I made a paper gasket and then I siliconed it. Perfect. That was the solution. No problems now. So just a heads up, make your own gasket for it. Just be way easier in the long run. Let's see. So with the 65 millimeter throttle body, I think the original ones, again, somebody would be able to chime in. I think they're like 56 millimeter. I think it's backwards of the 65, I wish I could say there was a night and day difference. I think it was probably more tuned. There could be a difference. Biggest thing is the intake leaks, fixing the cracked intake. That made a huge difference, but I don't know, and maybe I'm not quite, it's not going up in the power band at the high RPM that I'd really like, so maybe when it gets up there, it starts really making a difference, higher RPM. So, if you're trying to save money, you could do the 3400 intake and the 56 millimeter throttle body. I'm sure it'll pay off eventually, the higher horsepower it gets, but lower horsepower probably doesn't matter. Let's see. The block, I went ahead and had it machined. So anyways, the heads, because of 3400 heads, have a low compression ratio, like super, super low. You have to use 3400 heads, which are LA1 dish piston, or you have to use LA1 dish pistons in the 3.4 liter rear wheel drive block. That way it brings the compression ratio down, because otherwise your 3.4 has a flat top piston and your 3400 heads have a super small chamber, and for boost, no way. Maybe in A, but no way for boost. So make sure you just have your local machine shop put in or press in some 3400 pistons. There was no real hard problem with that. They had no problem putting them on. I think it was bored. I bored at 30 over. Don't do that. That was a mistake. It's as max as you can go, they say, at the machine shop. And had a problem and blew this engine up once, and it was lucky that they were able to just hone it and we were okay, because after that it would have been junk in the block, and that would have been a tragedy. So just do minimum what you need. I was trying to go for highest horsepower, you know, and all that. I'm sure it really doesn't make that much difference. Stock rods, stock crank, stock block, obviously. It does have a high volume oil pump by Melling, part number M134HV. High volume because you're trying to supply a turbo. I don't want to run that thing dry. That would be horrible. So make sure you get the high volume one just in case you need it, you know. Even if you don't, I'd rather have it. Works fine, no problems with it. Bolts right in, looks the exact same, to be honest, except for his stamped HV on it. So that covers the bottom. Oh, oil pan, factory. That actually was a 3.1 oil pan, but the 3.4 was about the same. It just had a little sensor for oil level, and I didn't need that, so I just went with the 3400 or 33.1 liter oil pan. I did weld a bung onto the front corner here, because my turbo drain goes down and straight into it. That way I don't have to have a scavenge pump, deal with any BS if it's smoking really bad. And I haven't noticed it, so I think I'm okay. But just an AN fitting welded right in the pan, super simple. Anyone can figure that out. That covers the bottom. The top part, or the front timing cover and water pump, are off the 3.4 liter. You need those because if you're going to run OBD2, the crank trigger is on the timing cover, of course. So you need that timing cover. The water pump is a smidgen bit different. It fits only that timing cover, so you got to use a 3.4 liter water pump. No big deal. Nothing really mounts up horrible to it. Everything fit nice. The cam sensor is on the front of the engine, front top of the engine, I guess. Again, nothing really hard about that. It was super simple. It does have a camshaft in it. My first cam was actually a Edelbrock camshaft for like a Pontiac Fiero, and I always thought it was the problem causing it to not want to go high up in the RPM range. So I did call Wide Open Throttle Technologies, and they sent me out a turbo cam. It probably made a difference. I think more than anything, it's tune. I think I've still got some issues to work out. So the tune's really what probably made the big difference. So, you know, cams aren't too specific or picky with a turbo, but if you want a turbo cam, go ahead and give him a call. He knows the specs on it. I don't know, but he has them listed on his website. Just call him and he can tell you the specs, but works fine. Nothing aftermarket, or you don't have to modify the heads or anything. It's not too high a lift. So it is a flat tappet cam, so make sure you break it in the proper way. You do have to go with a flat tappet cam because the block came with a flat tappet, and there's just no way to get a roller cam in there to my knowledge, and they're way different. So make sure you're getting a flat tappet from an earlier, like 3.4, 3.1, 2.8, like Pontiac Fiero or these Camaros. If you go with a later style like 3400, it'll be roller cam, and it's completely different. Even the front timing, the way the timing chain goes on, way different. Speaking of timing chain, the first time I did it, I put just a factory timing chain back in it, thinking nothing of it. And last time when I pulled it apart to put the new cam in, the timing chain was way stretched out, like a lot for how little it ran. So I went ahead and bought one, a heavy duty one from Wide Open Throttle Technologies. I'd recommend it. It's not worth the risk, and it could be throwing my time. I think that was also hurting a lot of things on top of the up on the big end. So went ahead and bought one from them. It went on really nice, and it was way stronger, so it should last longer. Then we go ahead and move on up to the push rods. They were all custom length. You have to, with going with the 3400 head on a 3.4 block, you have to do the custom length push rods. Be very careful there. I ran into some major problems with I didn't measure them properly, so make sure you do it right, because I have so many sets of push rods now. So the last set is the right ones, and I'm good now. And it did make a difference, I think, on the upper end. The other ones were actually pushing the plunger down way too much and possibly holding the valves open at high RPM, so also making it not want to rev out. So make sure you get the right ones. Again, wide open throttle technologies. He has easily, you can put in what length push rods you need. You can get 2 different like exhaust and intakes in one order. They're very reasonable. I think they're like 170 something bucks. It was not expensive. None of the parts from there are very expensive. That's where this build I think is a little cheaper, because by the time you buy an LS, you're gonna pay, probably a good one. You're gonna pay $1,000, I'd say. Maybe I'm sure there's cheaper ones out there, and then you got to find a way to control it, like fuel wise, with an ECU, or you go with a standalone. Blah blah blah. I could go into that, but again, I'm not an expert. It just when I was doing the research, the numbers were adding up, and they're adding up, and they're adding up. And I can tell you for a fact, this will outrun an LS NA. Absolutely. I haven't lost any LSs to my knowledge that weren't pro-charged or nitrous. So it runs well for that. So for the bang for your buck, I think these are probably the better way to go. Easier would be an LS because everything's super right off the shelf and bolts right on, no big deal. But back to the build. So push rods, the heads, just machined them, took them in the machine shop. I think they might have surfaced them. They cleaned them up. Valves, I think they put new valves in, just the normal rebuild stuff. Nothing fancy, no titanium valves, just normal OEM stuff. I did go with Comp Cam's Beehive valve springs. They're about perfect. You got to be careful with the flat tappet cam not to go too much closed pressure. It'll actually wipe the cams. So this is right on the edge, and that's where it belongs. So I know it's not valve floating. I feel pretty confident in it. And even the machine shop verified that it should not be valve floating because they have plenty of closed seat pressure. I don't know the part number offhand. I can do some research if anyone had questions on it. If not, Wide Open Throttle Technologies sells the valve springs, so you can go right through them and get them. They'll guarantee they're going to fit those heads. So rocker arms are factory. They have roller fulcrum. They're not roller tip. I'm sure there's a little bit of modification or maybe a little bit of power to be had there. Probably not worth the extra cost and modification. Those work just fine. They're not adjustable, so that's why you got to get the right length push rod. There's no adjustment to them. They seat down. They're just like an LS style, almost identical actually. Might even be the same rockers, to be honest. I'm not sure. I've never messed with an LS. Let's see. A little bit of port and polish. Probably too much. Don't go too crazy. I did, and I had problems with the intake gasket actually popping into the intake because I ported too much. And by the time that gasket squeezes, it squeezes in and then pops in. So careful on that. Don't go too crazy. Don't think it's necessary with the turbo anyways, probably. But port and polish, minor stuff. They're really good heads, actually. I'm very impressed at, compared to, I had the iron heads off the 3.1 ad that came out. Those are not nice. They're heavy. Their ports are not very good. They got a lot of casting flaws in them. The aluminum ones, there wasn't much cleanup and a little bit of gasket matching, and that's about as much as I did. It wasn't anything crazy. So they flow really good, actually. I'm super impressed. The canted valves are nice too. Like, they put in some thought into that. Again, it would have been really cool if they would have treated us guys with the 3400 turbo like in a front wheel drive Monte Carlo or something. That would have been awesome. Like, we deserve that, I think. So moving on up, fuel rail. That is a factory 3400 fuel rail. However, they have that kind of junky fuel pressure regulator on the end that's built on. It's a pain in the ass. It leaks. I had nothing but problems with fuel leaks on both sides, actually. Even on the inlet side, that stupid O-ring just fought me. In the end, I went and bought some AN bungs and TIG welded them. I have a TIG welder here. TIG welded them on for both inlet and outlet. The inlet is like a -8. I'd have to check, but I think it's a -8, and then the outlet's like a -6 or something. So works great. Best thing I could have ever done. The fuel rail works great. Otherwise, it was just that I had those stupid leaks. So now it's a simple fittings go on, and there's braided line. No chance of fuel leaks, and you don't want that. I don't want to catch my car on fire, so I spent the extra time on that. Injectors are 60-pound injectors. They do have the EV1 plug, so I did swap the connectors on this harness over to EV1. Just seems like there's more support out there for them. Plus the standalone ECUs or wiring harnesses typically go for that one. I mean, you can get them either way, but I just put those on this last time. I can tell you, I had 42-pound before that and running 15 pounds of boost with a lot of other problems, because that's the thing with this build. You take a lot of time. If you keep dedicating, it gets a little better and a little better and a little better. Like, you fix it, keep going back and looking at stuff, because I made so many mistakes, and every time it gets a little better, and you do see noticeable gains on drag racing or in the quarter mile, because I've been keeping track. My first pass out in this was like a, I don't know, 14.8. I do remember. It was a 14.8. Wasn't very happy with that, obviously. That was not okay. Luckily, within a next time going out, shaved it down to like a 13.5. And then from there, it's been just slowly whittled and whittled. Down to that 12.3.5 that I mentioned. And this next year, I got some plans. I'll talk about them at the end of making that thing go in the 11s. Uncle Sam deserves to be in the 11s. It's red, white, and blue. That's why it's called Uncle Sam, if you haven't figured it out. Injectors, the 42-pound, they definitely, at 15 pounds of boost, were on the duty cycle. They were pretty close to maxed out. They were getting up in the 80-90%, and that's not okay. Of course, you want to stay below the 80%. Now with the 60-pound, well below that. I think the most I saw was like 70%. So there's some room for improvement, even up in the boost and adding more fuel if I wanted to. They would not be the right size for E85. I'll just tell you right now, this is a pump gas car. Sort of. I like to say it's pump gas, and it was. However, it still is. It uses 91 octane, but I use a product called Octane Booster that allows it to go up to 100 octane. It depends on how much octane boost you put in. It is good stuff. It is not your Lucas brand over the shelf at Walmart cheap stuff that raises it a point or two. It is very expensive, but in the long run, it's cheaper than buying race gas by far. And I will tell you, it has kept this engine way safer. In fact, I wouldn't run it without that stuff. Too risky. Detonation's a real thing, and I was seeing some of those numbers. Knock sensor was pulling timing back to 0 degrees. That's how bad it was. So, and that was some slow passes, I will tell you that. But it is kind of on pump gas. Those injectors would not keep up with E85. No way. I'd love to swap to E85. I know everyone will say that's exactly what I should do, and they're all right. Unfortunately, I live in western Nebraska. Love this place, but they're in an E85 station for 2 hours. So it would be very impractical to take my daily driver fun car and convert it to something I can't actually get fuel for unless I get like a barrel or something. So probably never going to happen. And again, it's not meant to be an all-out drag car. I'm just trying to see how far I can push it without blowing it up. That is not the goal this time. Done it once. I don't want to do it again. Watch out on your manual boost controllers. I'll just tell you right now, that was the first time not the 3.4, but the 3400 build I built the first time. I only drove it for a month and got it on a dyno and was trying to mess around with upping the boost a little. Forgot to hook up the boost controller right, and it hit 25 pounds of boost and broke everything. So was able to salvage the block, the crank, but the rods, 4 of them were bent, and the other 2 had broken pistons. So it destroyed every single one. You could probably get away with forged rods, or you could go with forged rods and save yourself the trouble. Again, don't be a dumbass and you'll be okay. Like, I had, luckily, my 3.1 laying around, had the exact same rods to the T, perfect. Swapped them out, put new LA1 dish pistons back in it, honed it, back on the road, super cheap, great. So I lucked out there. Just be very careful. Don't fuck up like that. Take very, very slow on your modifications and double check your work. You don't want to blow it up. It's a pain in the ass. Let's see. Fuel. The TV cable is a pain in the ass. I will tell you right now. It is absolutely a pain. The good news, and this is the only good news, there is a little nib on the body for the 65mm LX5. It's for cruise control, but it actually clips right onto a 700R4 TV cable. The problem is the actual pivot is not the proper, and there's a lot of math that I don't know, but you either got to do it one of 2 ways. You max it out under full throttle, but when you let off, it's always pulling it in a little bit, or you go the opposite. It's not pulling it in at idle, but under full throttle, it's not pulling it all the way. Don't go that way. The transmission shop warned me about that, and they are correct. So I have it set up so under full throttle, it's fully pulling that plunger, so it's good. However, it makes it a little less comfortable to drive around because it hard shifts at small throttle increments because it's pulling that TV cable more than it should be, so the plunger's getting pulled in. Nothing life-threatening, it isn't hurting the tranny, it's just a little more inconvenient. So one of these days, I'm going to actually get crazy and make a standoff that's the proper amount with the right geometry, and it'll suck. But if anyone has a suggestion, I'm open to listen to it, because if anyone's had that problem, I'm down. And without it, you'll burn your transmission up, so you gotta have it hooked up. Throttle cable is out of that same 3400 2001 Monte Carlo. I don't think it matters. Any of the 3400 engines, the throttle cable will work. It's the right length. It's a little longer than the factory Camaro one. I just had to silicone it into the firewall for the Camaro because it doesn't quite fit right. It just glob black silicone around there, put it in there, let it dry. It's been in there for 6-7 years and never had a problem. So, and it just drapes around the front and goes right into the throttle body. Luckily with that throttle body adapter kit from Wide Open Throttle Technologies, it clips in super easy. There's no modification really. The little switch you see there is actually for the hood scoop. I have it rigged up full throttle. Just for fun. It does bring some cold air in and cool down the intake a little bit on drag racing, but it also looks super cool to see those pop up when you mash on it, so that was why I did that. Your IAC, your throttle position sensor, they're all factory sensors. Make sure they work, because that'll cause you some headache, of course. I'm still fighting a little bit of an issue, and it's not sensors because I replaced all of them. It's tuning for sure. So moving on, the coils are just factory ones. I was using junkyard ones. I thought I was having a problem with them, so I bought new ones. I can tell you it didn't make a difference, so they run fine. You do have to swap to a NGK TR6 spark plug. That was what the dyno recommended that I first took it to for tuning, because the factory plugs that you would see on a 3400, which is what I bought it over the counter, it was blowing them out like nobody's business. It was running god awful. They couldn't even get it tuned, so they had me grab some TR6s, put them in instantly, no problem. So make sure you got good plugs. The TR6 works well. It's the right size, everything, and I hope I have that. I know it's TR6, but message me if you really are interested, and I can definitely double check on that. Just Excel spark plug wires. I custom length made ones. I wanted to route them the way I wanted them, so I made them all from scratch. They work fine. They look cool. That's most of the reason I went with that. You could do something cheaper. You could probably get away with factory ones. I don't know. I didn't want to run the risk. The ICM is still a stock ICM. I will tell you the biggest downside that I'm fighting right now is you have no two-step. And I asked on the forum, and there were some good suggestions, but they were really kind of difficult. You had to crack it open, and I'm just not that good at wiring and stuff like that. And the rest of them were very expensive. So the very next thing that this gets is a new ECU just for that reason, because I do not have a two-step, and it really hurts. Let's see. Vacuum lines, make sure you have them zip tied, nothing fancy. I did put a one-way valve on everything that needed it. Like the one-way valve right there goes to my heater system and all my vacuum accessories inside the cab, which are all hooked up. They all work just fine. I can change all my doors. I can have my defroster, my floor vents. Everything works. This is a cruiser. I love cruising around. The heater's even in there. It has a heater core. I have a very, very low thermostat of 160 to keep it cool during the summer. So it puts out heat. It's just not, oh my gosh, super warm in the winter, but I don't drive it in the winter really. So it's just enough to keep off the cold in light fall and spring days. But I did put a one-way valve because you don't want to blow up your accessories inside. So make sure you put a one-way valve so vacuum can suck vacuum, but boost can't actually pressurize it. Same with the brake booster. Make sure you have a one-way valve. There is one on there. I stuck with the factory one. It seems to be okay, but just you never know. Let's see. Accessories. So that pretty much covers the motor. Not much else minus factory. Motor mounts were all stock from that 3.4, bolted right in, no mods. It was awesome. Harmonic balancer was stock, nothing fancy. Flex plate was the one that came out of the 3.4. Gasket kit, of course. Actually no. So I did do head studs from that wide open throttle technology, because after blowing the head gasket at that 25 pounds of boost, I wanted to make sure it wasn't gonna happen again. So I went ahead and did that. I did not go for the multi-layered steel. Wanted to, couldn't afford it. They were a little pricey, but they're from wide open throttle technology. The head studs have made a difference though. Not that I've risked it and just cranked the boost up to 25, 30, but I'm running the most boost I've ever ran on it, except for that accident, and that didn't end well. I hit 20 pounds of boost at the racetrack this last time, and it held together. Everything did, surprisingly. So I'm pretty satisfied with them. I would buy them again in a heartbeat. I think it's necessary. The head studs work great. I would not build one of these without them. So they cost money, quite a bit, but worth it. Please do it. ARP rod bolts. So it does have ARP rod bolts. I had the machine shop the last time after it blew up. Go ahead and true the rods and install them. It wasn't that expensive. Well worth it. No problems. I did not do ARP main bearing bolts. Probably should. Haven't noticed it in walking around or anything, or any bearing material. If I ever had to rebuild it again, I would definitely throw them in there just because. So if you have the money, just go ahead and do it. But I don't know if it's necessary. I was more worried about the rod bolt stretching than the actual main cap stretching. The rest is pretty much stock. So even the valve covers are stock. I will tell you, open up those breathers, because I gapped the rings too much this time around. I didn't gap them the first time. That ran into major problems where it broke two of the pistons. So you do need to gap them. I was a little gun shy after the first time, so I gapped them too much. So the blow by is pretty significant under boost. Most turbo engines are, but more than I care for. Not going to change it. Done a compression test. It passes every time. Every cylinder is good. It's good compression. It's just has a lot of blow by. But make sure you open those up and maybe let your machine shop do that if you're not quite confident like I wasn't. But open up those valve cover breathers for, especially for mine, I had to because it was actually creating so much back pressure in the engine that it was kind of popping out gaskets, valve cover gaskets, believe it or not. Both sides popped out. So yeah, I needed to do. So I upgraded to two bigger, let's see, 5/8? 5/8. Two 5/8 fittings on both sides going to a catch can over there. I did have it plumbed back into the turbo, and then it just kind of made a mess, and I forgot to dump, I didn't check the oil catch can once, and it filled up, and it put it into the turbo, and that was a real mess. So now it's just vented to the atmosphere, because that, you only do that once before you realize it was not